folks. Welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, a freewheeling conversation between Diana Butler Bass,
Hey there.
Kristin Dumais,
Hey, Jemar.
Robert P. Jones,
Hey, everybody.
and me. I am Jemar Tisby. We're four scholars. One of you is left out. You guess who? No, it'll probably be me. We are four scholars, three historians, and one sociologist who write about religion and its intersection with culture, history, and politics in America. We also each take our Christian faith very seriously, and we're deeply concerned about the future of both democracy and Christianity in the United States. Most importantly, over the years, we found ourselves to be not just fellow travelers, but friends. We're glad you're here for this very special episode of the Convocation Unscripted. We are live. And aside from the live in-person ones we've done, this is a first, I believe, for us. And of course, we wanted to do this after the 2024 presidential election. Normally, we are not quite sure what everyone will bring up as a topic, but of course, this time we know it's on everyone's mind, which is the election, and we just want to have a chance to process with you and with each other. We want to remind ourselves of community, that we are not in this alone, and we want to give some of our thoughts and impressions as people who have paid close attention to this election for many months and even years. So I think it's probably best to just start off. By the way, since we're live, we will welcome your questions and participation. Drop a line, tell us where you are tuning in from, city and state, and also go ahead and drop questions in the chat that we will do our best to respond to. So have that going as we communicate, as we talk. Let's just kick it off with initial impressions. I mean, we're not even really like a full 48 hours into this, or maybe just over that. So it's still pretty raw for us. Robby, tell us about the moment you heard about the results and what your reactions have been since then.
Oh, I get to kick this off, huh? All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I had made a decision early on to not pull the all-nighter, right? I was going to just stay up until midnight, and that's what I did. So when I went to bed, Georgia and North Carolina had been called, but that's it. And so I figured, I'll get some sleep. I'll wake up the next morning, and there's the big headline. First thing I did is pull up the New York Times, and I like literally rolled out of bed and pulled it up, and there was the big 2-inch font headline. I was like, oh, right, it's over. Got it. Okay. And then as I started looking, I mean, just realizing, that, yeah, there was just movement toward Trump across the board. And that we had seen just a couple of things I'll say while I've got the floor here is that we had seen the pre-election polling, like what every other pre-election poll is showing, just too close to call. And since we're here talking about kind of the religion and politics corner, in the pre-election polling, we had seen just no movement, right? Pre-election on any religious group. Everybody was like locked in. And I just want to kind of pause before we get anywhere else and say how remarkable like that in itself is, given the campaign that Donald Trump ran in this cycle. And even for Donald Trump, it was an extremist, racist, xenophobic. I mean, I do not think I've seen a more overtly racist campaign since George Wallace in 1968, who, by the way, also held a sort of fascist style rally in Madison Square Garden in 1968. So given that nobody moved, I think that's what I was just struck by, like, wow, like nobody budged, even with everything we're seeing in front of us. So I think I've still been kind of trying to wrap my head around, like, not just the kind of who moved 5 points this way or, toward Trump, but like the bigger question of, oh, but all these, particularly white Christians, white evangelicals, white Catholics, white non-evangelical Protestants, all of them voted majority for Trump again and again, and just didn't move.
Oof. Yep. Thank you, Robby. And we're going to dive into the numbers. You're going to have the spotlight a whole bunch here on this conversation. Kristin, you have been just pouring yourself out to try to warn people.
We all have.
all over the place, and in very prominent circles. I know. So I mean, how did this strike you after all that work crisscrossing the country, being on podcasts and news networks and writing about it and all of that?
Okay, so well, first let me tell you where I was. And it was on live TV in Australia. As it was late night, and I was this was exactly what I was dreading when I was asked to do this program. And I thought, okay, yeah, at least schedule me earlier in the evening, because I cannot bear the thought of having to process, all right, this future on live TV. And then I was like ready to go on. You have this black screen, and then but you can hear and they're processing the reports, and then they're um, and then I got delayed. And so I'm just sitting there listening, and I just hear all the bad news coming in, the bad news. And I hear them talking about, oh, that the window, the Harris's window is really shrinking. I don't even know if she has a window. And then they're like, let's turn to Kristin to talk about the faith vote. Like, hands down, my worst interview ever. I mean, I couldn't even see the person interviewing me. They cut the segment short anyway, so I got cut off. I was just like, and then I just walked out of the office here and thought, it's done. It's done. So it was absolutely just, gut wrenching. And uh how am I processing this? The reason this is true for all of us, I know the reason that I was working so hard was because I saw this danger, and I
Mm,
saw how close it was. And so it was midsummer when I just thought, I saw what was going to happen or likely to happen. I was looking at the numbers. I was, getting the vibe. This is before Biden had pulled out, just after Vance was selected, and then we had the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt. And I thought, I've got to do everything I can. I've got to do everything I can, and tried to do what I could, and it didn't matter. And no regrets, because I think I would have had a lot of regrets if I hadn't tried to do anything. But also, like Robby said, it's really devastating, all of the movement toward Trump. And frankly, I felt really, the last couple of weeks, I wrote this in my Substack, the last couple of weeks of the campaign, I felt almost superfluous because of
mm,
all the work that I had done to try to educate people on who Trump was, what he stood for, what this meant for American democracy. I mean, he was advertising it, wide open, and that was just unprecedented behavior for a political candidate in the modern era. Over and over and over again, leading the headlines. I'm like, well, behold, your candidate, right? And even then, like, that didn't dissuade people, that attracted people. And so I thought, okay, well, my historical analysis and contextualization, right? I mean, if just watching the guy isn't going to give you doubts, I don't think there's a lot that I can really bring to the table here. So honestly, felt just not useless. Certainly not, no success there, but I just am driven by a sense of telling the truth and of trying to be honest. And people can listen or ignore it. I don't know, but it's pretty devastating. It really is worst case scenario. We had
mm.
spent months, years even, in pro-democracy circles preparing for a contested election, preparing for how to de-escalate violence, for how to build up trust in the electoral system. And like, well, that was a waste because we didn't need any of it.
I hear it, and I hear the frustration, and I hear the sense of futility. I just want to mention that as you were talking, a flood of comments coming in saying
Yeah.
how much folks appreciate your work, our work in general, and how necessary it was. But oh, it would have been much better had we had a different outcome. Um, Diana, I love your commentary because obviously you're always so thoughtful, but also so pastoral. And you don't have to be in this moment. I would like really make space just to say this is effed up. And
I
but I'm
already
very
did that on
curious
a
about your
podcast
thoughts.
last 2 days.
Oh, yeah, you dropped the F bomb. All
I
right,
did.
probably an appropriate situation. So tell us more.
Oh, well, I'm not going to drop it again. But the what did happen for me, I'm just going to go completely personal here. And I was, watching And we were texting just a little bit back and forth, the four of us. And then all of a sudden, the three of you went silent on me. And I was just going, no, this is terrible. Robby must have some secret numbers somewhere and he doesn't want to tell us. And I mean, I was literally panicking. Kristin had mentioned the New York Times ticker, and I said to my husband, Kristin's scared of the needle at the New York Times. Should I look? Should I look? And he's, don't look, don't look. And I finally realized I was literally having PTSD attack from
Mm.
2016.
Yeah.
And I was reliving 2016 in my living room just 2 days ago. I was hyperventilating. I was shaking. I went into my bedroom. I hid under the same exact covers that I was under 8 years ago. I mean, it was terrible. And finally, I said, I can't watch. I'm turning the TV off. Maybe I said to my husband, do you think that the blue wall will hold? And he's going, it'll hold. Don't worry. Just try to rest. So I tried to rest. That was impossible. I was just tossing and turning like horrible. He finally came in. I said, what's going on? He said, oh, it's about the same. And he fell asleep. And then so about 2 o'clock in the morning, I said, I can't stand anymore. I'm going to look on my phone. And I was kind of hoping one of you had texted me, but no, you all copped out. And so I opened up my text thread, or opened up my phone, and literally on X 10 minutes before, the networks had called it for Trump. And I started screaming and I was shaking my husband in bed. And I was hysterically crying. I will use actually the word hysterical to mean exactly what it means. I was a woman who was in a complete emotional meltdown. And so I said to Richard at the top of my lungs in the middle of the night in the dark, why does America hate women? That was my response to the election.
How about you, Jemar?
That's heavy. Thank you all for saying and being so honest and vulnerable. I think everybody tuning in right now can see that our level of disappointment is commensurate with our level of effort to try to prevent this. And that's what I was feeling. So Diana, you talked about going, feeling the same way we did, or reliving that from 2016. I feel like that's what my body was telling me. It was so hard. This is why people get cynical, because for me, I had a sense of hope. There was all this momentum going into the election. I mean, Trump had just done the Madison Square Garden rally that was catastrophic. Kamala had raised, $1 billion over the course of the campaign and more. There were celebrity endorsements. There were huge turnouts. She had Black women behind her, which is always a good thing. All of these things, and it wasn't even close. That was just devastating. So even before it was on Tuesday, I spent Tuesday pretty intentionally not checking every 5 minutes. And I had a decent day most of the day. But there was this one moment where I was out for my walk and I didn't even intend it. But I thought about, what if he wins? And immediately I felt my body clench up. It was as if this like cold, hollow feeling had engulfed my stomach. And what I dreaded was 4 more years of work, of labor, of just clinging to any semblance of a democracy. And I don't think this next 4 years is going to be really anything like the previous administration. That was just a preview. And so since then, I have thankfully gotten some basic habits, right? Like, this is what I'm trying to tell people right now, is it's a time to go back to basics. It's not a time to overcomplicate. And the first thing that we need to take care of is ourselves, because we cannot do this work if we're not as healthy as we can be. And that is not, expensive spas or massage, which I love. If anybody has a gift certificate, I will take it. But it is things like a daily walk. It's moving your body. It is, trying to get sleep, which I haven't been sleeping. That's my big thing. I even if I go to bed at a decent time, I can't go to sleep. So, and then I've been so absent-minded lately. Like, I had I had 2 appointments in the last 2 days that I completely blanked on until it was like 10 minutes after the appointment. And they're like texting me, "Hey, are you coming?" It's like, oh my goodness, I forgot. Walking into rooms, forgetting why I'm there. It's all of that. And my thing is, I'm reminding myself it's going to take more than a day. Like, I blocked off this week intentionally not to travel, not to say yes to too much, because I knew whatever the outcome, we were just going to have to be able to have some space to process. So I'm not doing well at it, just like emotionally. It feels really, really heavy. And I think one of the most frustrating parts is people still don't understand the threat.
Right.
I think people tuning into this, y'all have a sense, but the millions, literally millions of people who aren't paying that close attention or have a different calculus, they have no idea how bad it can get. So that's where I am. Let's dig into some of the numbers.
Hey,
Jemar,
Jemar, I got
before
a question. I got a question for you. Is that this is something I've just been thinking about too. I think that there are many people who don't understand the threat, but I think there are many people who do. And I think there are malevolent forces and people with particularly horrifying motives who voted for this on purpose. I think they understood 100% or at least 80% of what they were voting for, and that it was a choice. And I've seen a number of people say, "Oh, so I guess we just didn't describe Christian nationalism well." I think we explained it really well. And I think we explained it so well that the proponents of Christian nationalism out-organized us. And I'm hearing interesting reports from people who I know in that broader evangelical world, is that they basically had an evangelical souls to the polls kind of movement, where there were these huge white Christian congregations where their pastors got up, organized buses, got them to the polls, preached sermons that were incredibly fear-driven about how white evangelical Christians never vote enough. And look at all this persecution. And if you want to stop this persecution, and you want to get our guy in there, you're going to have to go to the polls. And so I actually think that there were people who knew exactly what they were doing, and they organized it with money and power and influence. And then they may have manipulated some people who are less savvy. But I am not giving a significant part of these people a pass in any way, shape, or form to say that they didn't know what they were voting for. I think they know. And you know me, I'm usually the optimistic, happy one. So
I think there's always a grass tops and a grassroots thing. So grass tops meaning the elites, the people with money, and I think you use the precise right language. I think you said malicious or malevolent. I keep reminding people, I mean, just to speak spiritually, there is evil in the world. And there are people with evil motives. And if you have not experienced injustice personally or as a people, that can be an outdated concept to folks. But I mean, when you look at, like, I agree with you, Diana, there were people who knew full well what they were doing, and they led people astray.
Right.
On purpose.
Right.
So there's plenty of voters who just heard the talking points, don't really know the implications. But there are plenty of people who spewed those talking points, who knew exactly what they were talking about. So yeah, that's there. But Robby, I think you were going to say something.
Like, so you're talking about numbers. I mean, one of the, I think kind of whiplash things I've been experiencing is, yeah, so I've spent untold number of hours like looking at the numbers, and that's sort of like an analytical exercise that engages this kind of one part of your brain. And it's easy to get kind of emotionally detached when you're like in that mode, right? And you're kind of just putting the columns together and you're looking at the kind of spread, and it's very it's like a little puzzle that you're working with. But what I found is like in these last couple of days, like getting like lost in it, right? It's kind of like what you said, Jemar, like about missing the appointments, and like I can add numbers in my sleep, but like I'm not doing simple addition, right? Like that kind of thing. And I'm realizing that like what's breaking through are things like, oh, this is all my 14-year-old knows about American politics.
Mm.
This is his whole life, right? Experience is what is the Trump era, right? That and we keep saying to him, this is not normal. Like this is not what kind of American politics always looked like. I mean, yeah, I mean, there have been like dark times and all that, but like this, the extreme of it being so on the top of it in our lifetime, at least, right? This is not what it's looked like. And thinking about and like it's been specific people that have kind of like interrupted the addition, and that's been kind of just realizing like, oh, my daughter who has a dreamer, a friend of hers, like a really close friend of her who's a dreamer, and she's like, graduated from a US college, has a full-time job, was a award-winning athlete in college, like contributing to US society, like, and she may be deported under Trump, right? It's always been a kind of 2-year renewal, like hamster wheel, but there's been some every two, you get 2 years of reprieve. But thinking about Stephen Miller and Trump, and I mean, they just may summarily cancel the whole thing, right? Right out of the gate on day one. And here she is, right? Will no longer be eligible to work. Like, and so I think there's just the real human cost, I think, and that kind of lament, I think, has been just as I've been trying to like make analytical sense of like what's been going on, just kind of keeps kind of breaking in, and it's good, right? Because I think it makes those numbers mean something, when it does. But it's just notable, yeah, how that's kind of just breaking in.
Yeah, I'll
Anything
say
you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll just say
Kristin?
too, Diana, you were talking about the mobilization on the right, the religious mobilization and so on. I think one area where Democrats were really outplayed was the social media outreach
Mm-hmm.
and the podcasts and the TikToks. And if you look at some of the numbers coming out, they are like 50-1 impressions in the pro-Trump versus the pro-Harris camp. And I think Democrats were having fun with the the TikTokers discovering the Access Hollywood comments, and that was all a thing, but they weren't seeing that paled in comparison to what was happening in the world of social media and what was being like kind of fueled. I think too, yes, massive. I mean, you have the right wing Christian networks, and there's nothing new about that, but that's very easy to activate. And you have this massive amount of money flowing in, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
absolutely flowing in. You've got Musk 100% on your side, and I mean, those are pretty steep odds. And then you have the webs and the networks, the scaffolding behind that, and the right has really come together in the last handful of years and then handful of months. I know I've been talking to you all about Catherine Stewart's next book, Money, Lies, and God. It is so good. So huge shout out to for that book. It's available for pre-order. You read it and you're going to see what we are up against, and it's the organization, the ideology, and the funding in flowing into it. And so honestly, as I was looking at this election, right, the stakes were incredibly high because I thought we could lose it all, right? We could lose democracy. Democracy is 100% on the line. But the problem is that we couldn't win it. We could only stave
Mm,
it off. And
mm.
when I took the 10-year view, because of what I know about the history and what I know about these networks and what I know about the funders and the power that they have, I thought it was highly unlikely that we could stave this off for a decade. But I did want 4 more years and let us see what we can do. Right. And then we had plans for how can we work to bring the country together? How can we work to address the polarization? How can we do all of these things? How can we address the economic inequality? Right. But we don't have that. I just want people to realize that, I mean, from those of us who study this, um, it is not shocking because we know what we've been up against, or at least we have a sense. I think we don't even fully know what we're up against.
Yeah, I don't think you can underplay the new media environments at all.
Mhm.
And yeah, I was talking to Tim Whitaker, our friend over at the New Evangelicals, and he just so much work tracking these movements. And he was telling me that he watched over the course of the last year where he could see that there were these couple, few different kind of right wing Christian nationalist accounts that had very few followers. And then all of the sudden they blew up. And come to find out, what happened was is there was actually people scouting TikTok and Instagram in particular, looking for especially young right wingers. And then when they'd identify the accounts, they'd throw tons of money behind them and push them out. And so basically, they managed to create in a very short period of time a whole kind of superstar universe of mostly Gen Z Christian nationalist influencers. And, nobody, I mean, nobody at the Democratic National Committee was taking any note of that. Oh, that's just the kids play thing is TikTok. But his contention is that it's just highly influential and it's a very strategic place where billionaires put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, to mobilize on behalf of of that whole agenda and pro-Trump.
And the new media is a massive thing here. I think that, yeah, Democrats missed that. It's no small thing that Elon Musk bought Twitter and
Right.
changed the algorithm. And this is the only reason I'm still on Twitter is to follow other people, but I'm doing my best not to contribute anything to it.
And we should all say that, like, the four of us who have significant followers on Twitter have all seen the numbers go down. Like, the kind of engagement we used to get a year ago just went to nowhere once Elon Musk, we all got throttled down once Elon Musk took over.
My follower, was just like the steady increase and lots of engagement, lots of back and forth. And yeah, it's just stagnated. And, part of me was like, that's fine because like you, Robby, I didn't really want to be contributing to that. Didn't want to be in that space. And, other reasons to not be super engaged over on Twitter. So, for me personally, it wasn't a big deal at all. However, collectively, right, that makes a massive difference.
Yep.
So.
Well, I was going to say that I actually went and checked my analytics when people started telling me what was going on with like these right-wing influencers over on Instagram and TikTok. I thought, I never get very much engagement. I just thought mostly it was because I pulled back this year for my own mental health. But I have 70,000 followers on Twitter. And before Elon Musk took over, I had about 65,000. So it's gone up a little bit, but not a whole lot. And on a regular month, I had 2 million impressions. In September and October, in the months leading up to the election, I had a total of 22,000.
Wow.
I went from 2 million impressions to 22,000. I mean, that is huge. And so it means that I could put anything out there and, maybe 4 people would see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely crazy, given the fact that I used to put stuff up just randomly about my dog and I'd get 1,000 impressions. It was like, what the heck? And people don't, I don't think people really believe us that we've been throttled like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
free
we are all
speech.
on Substack, right?
Yep,
Yes.
Substack is, I mean, right, and
Plug.
that's why I went to Substack, actually. When I just saw
Yep.
Yeah.
things getting more toxic,
Yes.
and when I saw the direction Twitter was going, I moved to Substack. I love it over on Substack. I mean, I'm on Threads too for
Mhm.
that kind of
Mhm.
like immediate back and forth banter, making announcements outside the community, but I really love Substack, and I've realized just how much I love it in the last 2 days. Right? So, like, I have found that, like, I'm not eating, sleeping much, none of these things are really, happening, and I don't know what to do with myself, like, I don't even wanna look at my inbox, and, I mean, I do not wanna give another interview, ever. However, what I do wanna do is I wanna write to, like, Substack folks. I want to write to my people, my community. I want to process together, and then I read all the comments. And I'm like, if you look at us like not looking actually at the camera, here, it's because if we're not talking, we're all reading the comments, and it is so incredible, right? This is
Yeah.
what we need. This is what we are here to do,
That's right.
and this is what we need more of. We need to connect across distance. We need to connect remotely, and in person. We really, really are going to need to do better on that front because we are being throttled in different spaces. We're being isolated, and we're going to start feeling some real pressures in different ways. And like we said in our podcast before the election, I mean, we need to borrow courage from one another, and the only way we can do that is to stay tightly connected.
Right.
And I want to highlight what you just said. Substack for all y'all on here, we didn't advertise this live session on social media. This was only through our Substacks, and that is because you're a community, and we trust you, and we want to pour into you, but also we're receiving a ton from you. So just a thank you, a sincere, real thank you, and that is only this community is only made more important. Like we see the importance of it in times like these when it feels so dire, when it feels so hopeless in many ways. Community is one of the main things that keeps us going. So thank you for subscribing. Subscribe to the Convocation. I think many of you are subscribe to us individually. Certainly subscribe to all four of ours, but also to the Convocation because that
Which
is
is
where
free.
we put totally free.
Yep.
That's where we
Yep.
put most of the announcements like this, all of our new episodes, all of our content. That's getting funneled through the Convocation. So be sure to subscribe to that if you haven't already. And then while we're on it, this topic of community, Robby, can we talk about the next live event?
Yeah. Yeah, let's do. I've seen some shout outs from the Atlanta or Georgia areas. So a week from Sunday, we haven't even put this out yet. We're going to put this out probably in an announcement tonight or tomorrow, that we are going to be at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Atlanta, Georgia. The four of us live in the flesh. You may have seen that we were doing we've done a couple of these events where we all four come together. We did one in Tempe, Arizona. And we did one in Greensboro, North Carolina, First Baptist Church of Greensboro, and Dayspring United Methodist Church in Tempe. And we'll be at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Atlanta a week from Sunday. So that's November the 17th at 5 p.m. We're also going to have some live musical guests that will be with us as we've had in the past. So, live music, live conversation, and then we'll have a reception afterward for kind of chatting and kind of meeting and greeting, and all. Hopefully some local community organizations will be there to also give, if you're in the area, to give you something to do, right? How can we stand up? How can we organize? How can we get connected? We're going to have some community organizing groups there to help people get involved as well. So hope you can join us if you're anywhere within striking distance of Atlanta. Hope we'll see you there.
Can we have Robby talk a little bit about the numbers? Because I'm really struck by a couple of these numbers, especially the number. Okay, so I'm struck by the percentages, which Robby already said didn't change very much. But what the number that really gets to me is the participation level of each one of these different groups. And so it'd be great if Robby just sort of gave us some sociological clarity on those numbers, and then we can kind of take that wherever we want it to go.
All right, so I got to engage that part of my brain now.
We'll give you your objective
Somebody's
brain
got
back.
to.
Put my robot brain on. All right. Yeah. So, we've been, as many of you probably have, just so we're talking about the religion numbers here. I've been tracking them. Like, as I said, the pre-election numbers did not look like much was going to move. And for the most part, that's true. There's a couple of exceptions, but I did want to give you, just the kind of lay of the land. One thing that I'll just say out front that continues to astonish me, even as someone who looks at these numbers day in and day out, is that there are no two groups in the electorate that are further apart than white evangelical Protestants and African American Protestants. Like, if you sort the entire religious landscape to the most Trump supportive to the least Trump supportive, those are the groups that are on the polls. Now, think about that for a minute. Every time I say this, I always think about H. Richard Niebuhr's great piece that he wrote 100 years ago called The Social Sources of Denominationalism. And he described what he called the scandal of the color line in the church, and that we've become so used to it. I think that when I say that, it's like, oh, well, of course, African Americans are Democrats and white evangelicals are Republicans. But like, thinking about what that really means theologically, I think is like something I think is worth us kind of pausing on. So just to give you the spread here from the exit polls, white evangelical Protestants, 81% support for Trump. That's pretty much dead on. They were 84 in 2020. So it's pretty much within the margin of error, particularly for an exit polls. 8 and 10 continue to support Trump. On the other end of the spectrum, it's 13% of African American Protestants that supported Trump. 86% of Black Protestants supported Harris, right? So these are just literally mirror images of each other. And you think about, many African Americans understand themselves as evangelicals, share a lot of the theological beliefs, sing the same hymns, et cetera. And yet this is where they are. The other big thing to say about the vote is that the big thing that always stands out are that kind of white Christians tend to cluster together. We focus on white evangelicals, but it is also white Catholics and white non-evangelical Protestants that also vote about 6 and 10 for Trump. They did in 2016 and in 2020, and they did again in this election. Latino Protestants were right there with them. And for those of you who know, that group tends to be heavily Pentecostal, charismatic, and evangelical themselves. About 6 and 10 voted for Trump. And then on the other end, we've got, Jewish Americans, only 21% support for Trump, the unaffiliated, 25% for Trump. Those of other religions, non-Jewish, non-Christian, so Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, those groups we can't measure separately, but all together, only 3 and 10 support for Trump. The one place that we did see a shift that we did not expect seeing, and it was the thing that caught the exit polls by surprise across the board, was the shift among Latinos. And we see that filtering into the religious numbers as well. For the first time ever, we had a majority of Latino Catholics, so barely 52%, but they're supporting Trump. And I've already said 63% of Latino Protestants supporting Trump. But that shift among Catholics, Latino Catholics and Latino Protestants, there was a double-digit shift among both of those groups toward Trump. And that's just part of I don't think there's anything in the religions themselves that explains that. I think it was part of the larger shift among Latinos into the space that we see spilling over, into, and the one reason why I say that, particularly for Latino Catholics that move slightly more, it was an abortion, right? On those numbers, Latino Catholics are actually 6 and 10 support abortion rights, which is something most people don't know, as do white Catholics, by the way, and still majority voted for Trump. So that's kind of the complicated piece of this, but they weren't brought over because of their support for abortion. And I'm going to show you just one other thing, and then I'll shut up here. But I don't ever do this, but since we're live, I'm going to share my screen real quick and just show you like one chart that I kind of mocked up here. It's you're getting a little preview. This is going to be in a Time magazine piece that I just wrapped up, but I'm going to give you a preview here. So basically, this is actually not from the exit polls. But it lines up with the exit polls. This is from PRI's American Values Survey. But I just wanted to kind of collapse all the groups here so that you can kind of see, if we look at like white Christians versus Christians of color, that gap that I was pointing out here is just remarkable. Like, and so this is all white Christians. So it's white evangelicals, white non-evangelical Protestants, and white Catholics all together. But it's 2/3, right, of that group was kind of supporting Trump. And it's just a mirror image of the rest of the country, right? If you kind of look at Christians of color, and this includes Latino, African American, AAPI, and others, non-Christian religions like Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, kind of all put together, and then the religiously unaffiliated, they're all just about 3 in 10 support for Trump. So I think this is something I think that's really worth. There's like political implications of this, but I also think for those of us of faith, there are deep, deep, unaccounted for theological questions to be raised here as well.
So on that topic, I think we should start taking some questions here. And I know we're all tracking, so I'll just take a theological question that popped up, and then we'll.
Can I just
ahead.
ask Robby for one final clarification on the numbers before we do the theology piece? Yeah. And that is, Robby, can you tell us what the percentage of each one of those groups was in the electorate?
So it looks like that most groups turned out about, I think this is what you're asking, Diana, at rates fairly comparable to their proportion of the population, with one big exception. And that's been true in previous elections. But here it looks like white evangelical Protestants turned out at much higher rates than other Americans did. So that means they're overrepresented in the electorate compared to their position in the population. My best guess is they're about 5 percentage points overrepresented. So they make up about 14% of the country, 13.7% to be precise, but 14% of the country. When we look at the exit polls and you look at that white evangelical Protestant thing that we see in the publicly released exit polls, that big group made up 22% of the electorate, but we know there's some Catholics in there. So to make it apples to apples, you have to subtract 3. So my best guess is that white evangelical Protestants are 14% of the electorate of the population, but we're probably somewhere around 19% of the electorate, right? So they are overrepresented by about 5 percentage points in the electorate. And it means a couple of things. One, they just turned out to vote at higher rates, but it also means that the demographics of the electorate look like the country did 10 years ago. So it's a little bit like a time machine, right? Because of that differential turnout, it kind of drags the country back in terms of actual demographics to where we were about 10 years ago.
So that means about 1 in 7 Americans is a white evangelical. But when you look at what happened on Tuesday, about 1 in 5 of the voters who went and cast their vote were white evangelicals. Right. And that means that 81%, so they basically brought a voting block to the polls. So that voting block controlled a much larger percentage of those final votes. So when we look at the votes and we see that huge number for Trump, the Trump number is clearly inflated by that. It's a white evangelical vote en masse. And the Harris number is just sort of business as usual politics. Plus, I suspect that when we get the number of the unaffiliateds, we're going to see that they're less represented in the overall voting proportion, would be my guess.
Let me look. I think we may actually have that. They're looks like about 3 points underrepresented. Yeah, they're 24% of the electorate. They're 27% of the population. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people who would have voted differently, basically at 75% levels, didn't show up. So
all right, so
I just think those are really interesting.
All right. Yeah.
And I'm just reading all these comments and questions, and I just saw somebody mention that they're in Dallas and can't find a church that's not Christian nationalist. And I know I've spoken at one. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Wonderful. Yeah.
Wilshire, Royal Lane and Wilshire.
Wilshire Baptist.
Yeah, Wilshire Baptist. So check them out. But we need to do better with this, right? We need to do better of connecting with each other, finding each other, where do we go? Because we have the advantage when we drop into a city, we meet all these incredible people doing absolutely wonderful work, and so many of them feeling isolated. And so I'll just give that as a task to us to try to think about how we can better network and connect you with each other. Yep. In fact, I'm thinking at our Atlanta session, I think we need to we have this wonderful lengthy just conversation time afterwards where we sign books and there's food and we just chat. But I think we need to assign people the task of like meeting 3 other people there before they can come get their books signed so that they can make these connections with each other. It takes a little icebreaker to do that. Because I'm getting to meet hundreds of people, and each one I would just love to just go, let's go have a cup of coffee together, right? And so we just have to do better connecting. But let me get to that theology question. I saw somebody ask one about
Look at all these churches, showing up in the
Yeah,
in the chat.
know.
Okay,
that's
this is
how
a
we
really
do
great
it.
idea. We have a chat here. Put your church in the chat or recommend one.
Right on.
First,
All
first UMC in Dallas. I saw that
Yeah.
when I preached there. That's a great
Perfect.
church,
Yeah,
too.
keep it going. Keep it going. So I'll take on the. I saw somebody asked about the New Apostolic Reformation and what role that theology had in this. Immense, immense. So shout out to Matthew Taylor's book, The Violent Take It by Force. If you haven't read it, it is such a great read,
So
and
good.
it is so important. If you're not into reading, he has a fabulous podcast that essentially outlines multiple episodes, the arc of the book. So if you just Google charismatic revival fury, you'll get to the podcast. But let me give you an update. First of all, the New Apostolic Reformation, this is this kind of network of charismatic churches. This isn't your old school Pentecostal churches. This is a whole different thing. They're loosely
And not the old
connected.
Christian right?
No, not the old Christian right. Loosely connected, all about prophets and apostles and getting this direct guidance from God. We're talking about people like Lance Wall now. In 2016, they had a prophecy that said Trump was God's anointed, like King Cyrus, right, to save and protect God's people, American Christians. And that fed into this, he doesn't have to be Christian because who knew? God picked him. And also the strongman idea of he's the protector. Well, that just got amped up on steroids because the new version for 2024 wasn't King Cyrus, was King Jehu. Now, if you know anything about King Jehu, you got to like go back and into, Sunday school lessons here. Probably doesn't make it into a whole lot of sermons. This is the warrior king, right? The king who slaughtered Jezebel. Remember Ahab and Jezebel was an evil queen, and she was an enemy of God and of God's people. And so Jehu had her thrown out of the window, trampled her with his horse, and then wild dogs ate her corpse. So that was bad enough, but that's not the most gruesome part of the story, because then Jehu, and I quote these prophets, drained the swamp and cleared out all of Ahab and Jezebel's like children, families, I think like kids' heads on posts, and like really gruesome, and slaughtered all of the religious leaders who had supported their evil regime. Okay, that is their template, they say, and they have identified Trump as Jehu. And look what happened. We have our warrior king, and who's Jezebel? I'll give you one guess, right? Jezebel was defeated. And Harris, Jezebel, there was a lot of that bubbling up in these spaces too. So where does that leave us now? It's the drain the swamp era, right? And the problem here is, this is just spiritual warfare language. This is just the spiritual stuff. But then you add that to Trump's own violent rhetoric. And on January 6th, right, the folks on the Christian signs and symbols and stuff, almost all of those were brought there through the NAR networks. That's who these guys are. So violent rhetoric can easily be turned into acts of political violence, right? So all of this is just bad news, and it's really hard to convey if you are not familiar with this world, if you're not in the world of watching these televangelists and on Facebook in these spaces, Christian radio, you're not going to have a clue who I'm talking about. And you're going to think, these guys are fringe. They are not. Incredibly important political sell, right? And then they spill over into the mainstream evangelicalism, mainstream Christianity too. And so this stuff just kind of becomes a meme, and it becomes like common knowledge, and it just really shapes how people understand how Christians should act and how God is acting in this moment. So I'll just leave you with that. But I just had to give an interview with a reporter from CNN, and he had asked about this Jehu thing, and I was like, oh man, and I had to tell him all this, and it sounds wild, and all of it's very bad, and I don't know how else to put it, but it's it's not good.
I'm curious,
So
historically, I think maybe the three of you probably, I mean, I might know the answer to this historically, but I'm curious as to what you two in particular think, is that the charismatic movement bled over very easily into Catholicism. So Robby was talking about, sort of you had to peel back those 3% of the people who accidentally identify themselves as evangelicals in the polling data, but that they're really Catholic. I just kind of wonder if that's like a image possibly of the same thing, how far the New Apostolic Reformation may be bleeding over into theocratic Catholicism. And you just said that it was bleeding over into other parts of Protestantism, which would include mainline Protestantism, my part. But I think it's more bleeding over into Catholic circles, would be my sense. I mean, what do you two think from knowing American history?
well, I remember, I think it was the Opus Dei movement, going to Notre Dame as an undergrad, and so there's elements of charismatic Christianity in pretty much every Christian tradition, including Black Christian circles. And so I do think their views of prophecy and eschatology lend to interpreting current events and political events in these very specific ways, and that tends to support these extremist, far right, all of that stuff candidates. So I've seen it for a while. I've also seen the very conservative strains in Catholicism in general. Like I said, when I was an undergrad, 85% of the student body was Catholic and 85% was white. And these are usually middle to upper middle class, if not wealthy white people who are products of their environment in many ways. Not to say that they don't have agency and aren't thinking for themselves, but they kind of fit the mold in terms of the way white Christians in general are thinking about things. And then I think, at least in those circles, so I'm not speaking really historically at this point, but at least in those circles, it kind of supercharges the tendency to view politics in a certain way.
I'll add that in the charismatic Catholic overlap there, we could talk people of praise. That's the kind of shepherding, hierarchical, somewhat secretive group, right wing group that Amy Coney Barrett was part of. And but more than that, so we could talk about these kind of official spaces of overlap. But the thing about this NAR world is you can access it on the internet, right? You can access it on the radio and on Facebook. And Matthew Taylor in his books talks about how they produce kind of memes, right? These memes, these pictures that go around, and these prophecies that just like spread like wildfire. And so, absolutely, it's reaching into Catholic churches. And you don't have to have your priest, although there are plenty of priests who maybe participating in this too. But it's this kind of popular religion that is deeply and deliberately politicized, and it's this incredible network for mobilizing voters, raising funds, and getting people to get on buses and head down to the Capitol.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I'd add too, just the vision of Christendom, like kind of bringing back Christendom, I think is how this has inroads. I mean, that ought to be an odd thing for Protestants, but it's less. It's not so much, but it's bleeding into Catholic churches and Orthodox churches as well, right?
Yeah.
So you think about, and it's worldwide. This is not just a U.S. thing, right? So it's Orban in Hungary and the Catholic Church. It's the Orthodox Church in Putin and Russia, and this blending, right? And it is just this promise of we're going to bring back, right, this kind of pure, it's both a kind of ethno purity, a religious purity. Like it's that vision of the country we're going to purge the country, right? So all this poisoning the blood of the country is all tied up with that vision of kind of restoring this kind of white European Catholic or Christian, purity to the country, and kind of taking us back again to, when the country was great again.
I was going to say, I want to honor the questions that
Yeah.
are here. And
Mhm.
so can we do a rapid fire? I'm going to pick a question. I'm going to ask
Yep.
one of you, and in your best way to honor the space that we have in terms of time limitations, address it. Robby, this one's going to go to you.
All right. So we may go a few minutes over then. It's looking like, all right. So that'll be all right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. These are great
we're
questions.
rocking and
I'm reading them
rolling.
all
Yeah.
as they come in.
We're good.
I lost track of it, so
And
sorry
what
I
else we're
didn't
going to
use
do
your
except
name.
not sleep, right? So
Exactly. These are the questions that are keeping us up anyway. So let's address them. Robby, this first one comes to you. It's from someone in Hattiesburg, which is kind
hey,
of a blue dot. Yes.
I know folks in
Mississippi
Hattiesburg.
connections.
Yeah.
Yeah, they mentioned you had come there several times.
Yeah.
And so it's,
University Baptist,
oh,
Hattiesburg,
good.
Mississippi. Yep.
Um, so it's kind of a blue dot in
Yep.
the red state of Mississippi. So they're asking, how can folks in those, political havens, if you will, or at least left-leaning areas, organize in the midst of a state and a state government that is so Republican?
Yeah, well, it's hard. Well, first of all, let me just shout out to the good folks at University Baptist in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, just about an hour south Highway 49 from my old house. So happy to kind of see you in the room. And I mean, gosh, I'm from Jackson and grew up in Mississippi. Not in a more kind of progressive space, but I think it's like super important because like the challenge is, Diana was pointing out, like the challenge is like when you're in a world where it's just so overwhelmingly one thing, like that witness of saying, oh no, 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 like wait a minute, is so important, right? Just to be the other voice, right? To say no, and we are authentically Christian, we take our faith seriously, we follow Jesus, all that stuff, and right, because of that we are holding these positions, right? And see it differently than you do. I just think it's super, super important. And I remember, so I taught in Missouri. I lived in the South, and what I found is that like the places that will stake out that space are going to be the beacons of light for all the people in the chat right now who are like looking right for that thing and feel isolated, feel alone, and probably be willing to drive an hour in right, to find somewhere where they're not completely alone. That was certainly true in Springfield, Missouri. I think I saw National Avenue from Springfield Disciple Church from Springfield. I know Diana was just there. Yep. I taught at Missouri State for a while in Springfield. And I know that whenever we had events like that, we would have people driving in an hour, 2 hours, just to be with other people, right? And so I think holding space, I think, is a really important thing, and being that kind of counter witness to the dominant ethos is super important.
Kristin, you've written a whole book about this, so maybe narrowing it to one point that you think is particularly salient. Beth asks, I don't understand how the Republican Party allowed themselves to be taken over by Trump. How did that happen?
With open arms, honestly, for the most part. And then with a lot of cowardice, on the other hand, with people who thought that they could use this to their advantage, right? I'm saying within the Republican Party, you could say the same thing about within evangelicalism. And that capitulation, thinking that this could be good for us, use this power. And then you realize at a certain point that in the book, How Democracies Die, you can see it on the shelf behind me. The authors talk about this, that, it's the gatekeepers who open the gates wide thinking, oh, we can control this guy. We can control this, populist movement. We can control this and use it to our advantage. And then all of a sudden you can't, and it's too late. That kind of capitulation we see absolutely in the Republican Party. We've seen that in many cases in the white evangelical space, but not exclusively, right? And then you see the battles. You see the vicious attacks at those who do not bend the knee. And those are meant to be object lessons for the rest of us. We will do this to you. You see people getting fired. You see just absolute cruelty on social media. I mean, just look at what David French and Beth Moore and Russell Moore and these people, and you may or may not agree with them on any number of issues, but the hate targeting them is a deliberate strategy to discredit and take the power away from the moderating voices who are speaking within communities saying, no, don't go there, no, that's not our faith, no, those are the people who have to be destroyed. And I've been watching social media today. I mean, even on election day, like one of these Christian nationalist leaders, a particularly vicious one, had a list of enemies who were and I was on it, right, who were going to be on the, I don't know, some
Who
ash
he was
heap
going to
of
love,
something.
though, right?
Judgment was coming. Judgment was coming. Right. This is a deliberate strategy. So if you're in these spaces and you're courageous and you speak out, don't expect it to go well. But that's the point. But if you know how this works, then you just say, I'm a threat to them. That means I'm doing something right. Don't take it personally. Just be like, oh, kudos to me. Right. You just have to understand the way the system works.
Diana, this is from Chelsea. She says, I'm seeing many folks on the Christian left post things telling people to unfollow them if they voted for Trump, talking about how they're going to refuse to be in a relationship with friends or family who voted for Trump. What's your response to this? I find this disturbing to see because it continues to divide us further.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this today because so much of my theological and pastoral work in the last couple of years has centered around the uh, trying to shift Christians away from violent images of faith toward a different set of iconic sort of images that we can create peace and community around. And so I've been talking a lot, for example, from shifting the emphasis of Holy Week from the Friday cross to the Thursday table. And so simply today, I was thinking about the table and how in the last week of Jesus' life, there were all these people who were around the table, including a couple people who wind up betraying Jesus, Judas notably. And I'm sure there were people who also left the movement then. They had dinner and they said, this isn't for me. And the big shebang happens on the cross and they're out the door. And so, um, is it, but the table on Thursday, so many people were there. And Jesus doesn't run any of them off. He feeds them all. And so there's a sort of a fundamental Christian call to sitting at table with even those who will betray you. Now, given that, it also means that there's moral responsibility on the part of the people who are the leaders at the table. Is that if Judas is going to go after somebody else at the table besides Jesus, I think Jesus would have stepped in and taken Judas out of the room and said, you can betray me, but you're not going to hurt Peter or what have you. And then there's also the really interesting theological thing that happens when everybody's having dinner at Lazarus's house, right, during the last week. And Judas is there and Mary Magdalene is there. And Judas and Mary Magdalene have a big fight over the table. And the table is Judas is mad because Mary Magdalene has spent some of the money to buy perfume and she anoints Jesus' feet with it. And he says, how can you do that? You have to give the money to the poor. And they literally have a blow up in the presence of Jesus. And what happens is that Jesus backs Mary Magdalene. And then I've thought about that. I thought that would make a great sermon. Is that, yeah, you have the table, and sometimes there are fights around the table. And sometimes you have to keep the table safe by having a person with power stepping in and being willing to protect the people who are the weakest at the table. And then sometimes you just have to choose. Am I going to be like Judas or Mary Magdalene? Which of these two biblical characters do I want to live like? And so I think that there's some complexity here. For Christians, it's not a clear blanket answer. Oh, yes, you should always have everybody at the table. Or yes, you should exclude all of the people who voted for Trump. I think that the Christian vision is that everybody gets a seat at the table. And then you have to be wise about what is happening around that table and what your part is going to be in creating table fellowship. So that's my answer to the question.
Beautiful. I'm going to take one question and then we're going to go do closing thoughts. All right. So this is from Norman. This is pushback I get from my Trumpy family. If he's so racist, Why did Hispanic and Black share of voters increase? Multiple answers to this. The initial data is that inflation, high prices of everyday goods were a big factor in this election. And there are some people, Black people, other people of color, who looked at that and said, we need something different. However they felt about Trump, they just didn't want the Democratic Party in control again, who they're putting the onus on for these high prices. So the inflation, the cost of everyday goods is one factor. Another factor is sexism. So I think if we dig into the numbers, it's probably a greater share of men who are Black and men who are Latino or Hispanic who voted for Trump and switched. Another factor is that a lot of Hispanic people identify as white. Robby, do you have a percentage on that? Not to put you on the spot, but there's a good number of that.
86.
No, 86% of Hispanics identify as white. There you go. Well, that makes a difference. So another data point I heard was, you can be Hispanic and identify as white, and you're second, third generation. So you're English speaking, you've never lived in a Spanish speaking country, you feel more American and more white than Hispanic or Latino or whatever, the going back and tracing your family lineage from. So that's another huge factor. I think to turn it around on this person though, yes, the share increased slightly in the case of Black people. And really, if you look at Black men and women, the average is still more than 8 and 10. So that's the question. Why historically have Black people voted at this massive percentage for the Democratic Party, or more broadly, the party at least that promises progress, whether they actually fulfill that or not? The question is not, well, why did that percentage increase? Question is really, at least when it comes to Black people, why has it been almost universal that Black people do not see in the modern Republican Party a place that's going to be good for them or their communities? So that being said, briefly, what are your closing thoughts? Now, this can be things that are giving you hope, things that you're looking out for, just marching orders, how to prepare, whatever it might be. Let's start with you, Kristin.
Oh, first of all, let me say how much I have loved doing this. I didn't think that I would like this format as much as I did, and it's solely because of the chat, and that I absolutely realized how much I need this. Just like the comments on our Substack bring us into some kind of community. I love that, but what I love is also seeing you all interact with each other. So again, I think we're gonna do some thinking for how we can make this more of a regular feature, to build this community and to build these connections. I absolutely love all your questions. I'm gonna, for my closing thoughts, take one of the questions, which is, are we afraid?
Mm.
And I will tell you again, a few months ago, I had to pull my husband aside and say, so here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I've already done and said. And here's why there's a fair chance I'm going to be targeted if these guys end up with power. And I said, I have a choice to make now. I could pull back, not that it would make much of a difference probably, or I could lean in. And I thought it through and I decided I was going to lean in. And then I play out different scenarios, as I think we're all doing now, and we don't know what's ahead. We really don't, and that's agonizing. If it's going to be bad, I just want to know. Like, let's get this on, right? But we don't. We have 2 more months, and then we have a day at a time. And I'm just like Jemar said earlier, exhausting to think of minimum 4 years of this playing out and waking up every morning. Okay, what do we have to deal with today? What do we have to deal with today? Some of those scenarios that I'm playing out in my head are bad for our country. Some are really bad for me. But I don't know, go back to Timothy Snyder, do not obey in advance. That's so important because authoritarian regimes succeed on fear, on instilling fear. And if you go quiet, they have already won. And then they can do whatever they want. So I think our job right now, as it was in the months leading up to the election, as it is now going forward, and yes, the stakes are higher, but our job is to not be afraid. And particularly those of us who, there are some in the society that are more vulnerable. We're all vulnerable to a certain extent, but some of us who are less vulnerable, and the thing that makes me feel less vulnerable is the support networks that we have with each other, that we have with you all, and we just really have to be deliberate about connecting and having each other's backs.
I'm thinking a lot about history, and there's two sort of quick parts of this. One is over recent years, there are a lot of white people in this country who have become a lot more sensitive and aware of the issues of race and our really painful history of white supremacy and enslavement and what that's done to us as a nation. And a lot and I'm one of those people, and I've learned a tremendous amount. I have all kinds of new friends. I'm in conversations now that I never thought I would be in. I was invited just the other week to be a part of a conversation at the King Center online, and I was the only white person in the room, and it was just like so amazing to be invited there. And while I was sitting there and I was in this room, this online room, with all these people of color, and I was listening to what they were saying, I thought to myself, well, what do I expect? You know, if I, as a white person, decide to sit at a table with a bunch of black people, do I expect that history is going to be easy on me? Do I expect that I'm going to start experiencing history just like, oh, yeah, sure, 4 years of Trump, we can make it through? No, I've decided to sit at a table with people who have been suffering with this for 400 years.
Mm.
And that becomes a different story that I purposely have put myself in. I was always in it, but I was in it unaware. And now I'm aware of the story. And so that longer piece of history says, well, this is par for the course, people. This is what happens with this, and this has been happening for a really long time. You just didn't notice. And so I think now in this election, a lot more white people notice, and they're kind of panicked, you know, and that's okay. Your panic is good because that means you see the world differently than you did, maybe 10 or 12 or 20 years ago. And that's fantastic. So that's really important. And then the other place of history that I think about, and this is also pretty brief, is um, I think that we have just crossed this week. I think this is what I call now the end of the beginning. I think that for all these decades, some 40 or so years, we have been living into this story of white Christian nationalism and evangelicalism, at least 40 years, maybe 70.
Amen.
And 10 years ago, that story started changing, and it moved from the edges of evangelicalism into the center of our political discourse and our political experiences. And the Trump era has been that, has been the full mobilization and visibility of white Christian nationalism in the most important institutions in the United States. And I think on Tuesday, the beginning of that project ended. And now we're at the beginning of the middle. I don't want to say we're at the beginning of the end because I think that the end is way, way off. But I think we're at the beginning of the middle. And to ask ourselves what the middle is going to take is the new set of questions. And just my first inclination is there are many things we are not going to be able to save, but we are going to have to figure out what we can protect and who we can protect. And so we've moved from one phase to another phase. And I think we just have to be highly aware of that. So we've crossed the Rubicon from the beginning. We've come to the end of the beginning, and we are now at the beginning of the middle.
So well said, Diana. That is, yeah, I've been using this like we have turned a page. This is an entirely new chapter. But you're exactly right. This is the end of the prelude,
Yep.
right? And now we will see what comes next. We have inklings. We have a blueprint that we can follow, but here we go.
Robby, closing
Well,
thoughts?
yeah, I'll just triple down on this because I think if there's one thing, as we've talked, just like among ourselves, right, over dinner, as we've been kind of traveling around the country, like the thing I think we keep coming back to is like, no, this is different. Like this is not just worse than it was, like in some kind of incremental way. Like we've actually crossed a bright line here, and getting people to see and understand that we've crossed a bright line that's going to require something different from us than it has in the past, I think is like really, really important. I think particularly for people who are white, because frankly, most of us have not had to sacrifice a lot. Most of us have not had to put a lot on the line. Church is just this thing we kind of do and meet interesting people and network for jobs and find our girlfriends, right? Like that's what church is. In addition to like, kind of worship and stuff, but like it's not a place that, as it has been, as Jemar's like so eloquently like keeps reminding us, in the black church, right, it's a different story. But in the white church, it's been a pretty comfortable place to be, right until very recently, for many white people. And I think we're going to have to kind of get used to the cost and the discomfort and the loss, and the awkwardness, right? All that stuff is going to have to be real, because I think, Dana, I love what you said about, like what can we protect? What can we preserve? Who can we protect? And my daughter loves to kind of rib me from time to time and like quips. Well, must be nice to be a straight white man in America, right? Whenever she kind of is thinking about these kinds of, and I think it's right for those of us who find ourselves perhaps less vulnerable because of some of those attributes. Like we're gonna have to cash in some chips, in these coming years, for the people who don't have them, right, and who are going to be first on the line. Like I'm thinking about my daughter's friend who's a dreamer, right now, like who's been really close to my thoughts in these last couple of days. Like we're going to have to find ways to stand up for them. It's going to take money. It's going to take time. It's going to take organizing. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that just back to you, Jemar, is it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so we're going to have to take care of each other. We're going to have to take water breaks. We're going to have to, kind of help each other out, maybe carry each other across the finish line a couple of times, but we're going to have to do this for the long haul and pace ourselves. But I think I'm with you, Kristin, man. The chat piece of his is probably done more for me than anything in the last 48 hours. Just seeing everybody together and people talking to each other. And yeah, I think much, much more of that to kind of keep us all going.
Candace Adams asked if we can protect LGBTQ people, and she asked us privately, and good for her. I don't mean to out you, Candace, but she's from Missouri, and yes, absolutely. We all answer that question. Absolutely.
Yeah.
My final thought is simply there is virtue in doing the right thing, not because we win, but simply because it's right. If there's one lesson history teaches us, it's that we don't always win. And let's just name it. Tuesday's election was a defeat for democracy, for the common good. And I think the grief that we feel is because we feel that as a defeat. And in the midst of that, who we have become and are becoming in trying to do the right thing matters too. The people on here, because of your passion for your neighbor, for your faith, you have become more courageous. You have become more resilient. You have even become more loving and faithful in the process. And so if we hang all of our hopes on who gets elected, what law or policy is passed or not, we're guaranteed to be disappointed because we won't always get that. But if that's all there is, then that's all there is. But I'm saying there's something more. And the community that we've sensed here tonight is part of that. So don't grow weary in well-doing, as the Bible says. There is something important simply about pursuing the right thing, or righteousness, as the Bible says, not just because of the way it changes the world, but because of the way it changes you. On behalf of me and my co-hosts, thank you for joining the Convocation Unscripted, this very special live post-election edition. We want to remind you to subscribe to the convocation.substack.com. You can keep up with the next event and live events, in-person events, including the one coming up in just a few days. And subscribe to our individual Substacks. We will see you soon on the next Convocation.